Okay, it's yours now, John.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is, in whichever wherever it is that you are in the world. Thank you for coming to, which I've just worked out is the 22nd annual meeting of DDI Alliance membership, which is quite remarkable in itself. And yeah, I'd just like to, before we start, just thank the executive board and scientific board, in particular, but also the massive amount of work that carries on day in, day out through the working groups and all the sort of activities of the community more broadly. So it's one of, I think I've inherited the State of the DDI Alliance as a title. Um, anyway, it's what it is. So just thought, so those people, Eddie might have seen this, but I just did a little thing about, the evolution of the alliance in terms of the structures and the products. And I think it is amazing that the community has achieved these things over so many years and consistently rolled out new versions of the products and held these sort of events and community building activities over the years to sustain them for long periods of time. And I think that is testament to the community, but also I think it says a lot about about the standards and the sort of people that get attracted to work around it and its utility as well. And also, more recently, we've seen the new products coming online from related uh, extensions of the existing work as we try to meet the emerging needs of the community. And I think that's a really healthy thing that we shouldn't forget um, in the round. Um, so the sort of product, a sort of big picture really, is that the standards that the alliance produce and the activities are very widely used. This is a snapshot, might be not completely accurate snapshot of where we are, pulled out from information that I've managed to pull from various sources. But it does show, the breadth of the activities of the alliance and the standards that we use. And also, COBRT was the first of the standards that the alliance developed more than 20 years ago, and it still remains a staple of the user base. And I think that's I don't personally think that's going to go away. In fact, somewhat in some ways, it's been given a new life through things like particularly like Dataverse. So it's quite a thing to bear in mind. I think in that, well, whilst we have a range of products, some products have still got enormous traction, and perhaps will continue to do so. So we had a membership survey back in the last year, which thankful for everyone who participated. And I think the overwhelming uh, response was people incredibly uh, uh, supportive and happy and very pleased about what the alliance does as an organisation in terms of this. Would you recommend the alliance question? And there was a lot of very positive feedback about we're having been a key resource, how we're valued across sort of the culture that comes with the community. The standards, obviously, and that we continue to develop those. And there was lots of suggestions for areas where we can improve, which perhaps we'll come on to some of those things a little bit later as well, in relation to the strategic plan. And the lots of strengths, alliance, and particularly around creativity, being motivated and in the collaborative sense. It's one. I mean, I've been around the community for 10, well, best part of 15 years. It's something that that level of community and has really been a motivator and participation. I know certainly people I've spoken to over the years, that's been a very, very important part of the community. And I think, we need to make sure that we continue to retain that. And that we increasingly be doing much more events, particularly we in collaboration, for instance, with Co-Data in more recent years, and those things have been really, really valued to an audience which perhaps we hadn't reached previously. So Jared put the survey through ChatGPT, as is the way we do things today, and this is what it produced in terms of summary of the things. So it's easy in summarizing it by hand. It was a really useful thing, and I think this has helped us develop the strategic plan, which we'll come on to talk about in a minute. But I think the marketing outreach, product promotion, these things aren't necessarily unexpected, but it's good to see that there is a sort of consensus around the community about that these are the things, the priorities that people think are important. So over the last year, there's been some really interesting discussions on the executive board, and the sort of things, the three things really that I think have occupied us have been the marketing group. So we attempted to relaunch the marketing group, but thus far have had little response. So perhaps more on this in the strategic plan discussion. The other has been perennially, our responsibility in terms of membership structure. So the membership has grown, but primarily around associate and members. And we want to initiate discussion around the membership on structure, things like membership benefits and so on over the next year. We were thinking originally to have that discussion today, but we just haven't done the proper groundwork. So we thought we'd do that more groundwork to make sure that we have that discussion in a proper structured way. And obviously that relates to the financial position of the alliance, although we have got a healthy balance, as I'm going to talk to it later. We're quite keen that we make sure that it aligns with the use of that money is well aligned with the new strategic plan. So there are, I think lots of challenges in the environment. The world's changing quite quickly in lots of ways. There is, it's a positive and a challenge in the sense the adoption standards by existing or emerging infrastructures means that we're called upon to help and assist people, which is obviously a challenge in terms of the activities of some of the people involved in the community. But there is a challenge of a more diverse user base. So it's not just archives and ASOs, it's much more research and other areas as products like CDI, for instance, have shown. And the delivery of big interoperability projects like EOSC and so on is obviously a challenge to work out where we fit in that in this sort of multi metadata standard world. And then AI can do summarize, but it is a challenge for the community as a whole, for the whole technology sector. But how AI and ML will affect what we do and how we do it, and what place DDI has in that. And so retaining and expanding memberships is obviously always a continuing challenge. But there are lots of opportunities. I think that the standards of clear, we're doing FAIR well before FAIR was a thing. We've been established user bases, we've got mature standards. There are a whole new thing around whole metadata only platforms, which is interesting. And there's enormous amounts of experience and leadership in the community actually building real infrastructures, and I think that is an important thing where we can say that actually this isn't just jam tomorrow. This is stuff that's being done by the community already, and I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, that we have that experience to help the other communities and communities which we haven't reached yet, to develop and have better ways of sharing data and communicating about that. Are there, does anyone have any comments or questions about that at all? I can't actually see the thing, so I'm probably monitoring the chat. Does someone want to raise a hand or say anything? No. Okay, fine. I will move on to the talking about the strategic plan. So the strategic plan's occupied the exec for quite a lot of the last year. Had several iterations. We shared it with the scientific board as early as we could, and we've had really helpful feedback from them in terms of its contents, and that's been really helpful in what I think are now two things that are pretty well aligned. So we've got a strategic plan, and obviously, as Hilda will come and talks about later, the scientific plan, which I think they work very well. They will work very well together. So hopefully people have had a chance to look at it. If they haven't, I'm going to do a quick run through. So it's there are three broad areas that we picked up in. One is engaging the community. And I think, as mentioned before, the membership survey sort of indicated that building the community is really important, and there was a clear request for products and events was a key area that was picked up. And I think in relationship to the survey, in terms of the sort of retention of membership and expansion of membership, it's obviously important that we continue to do that. We have faced challenges in the past where individuals have left organisations, and we've struggled to retain the relationship with those organisations, and we think it's important that we try to mitigate against that as much as we can. Do people have any ideas or thoughts on sort of events or community building activities that they think might be helpful to them as member organisations, or as individuals even? Is there any? Is anyone picked up, Jared? Could you pick up? Is anyone raising anything? I can't see the thing while I've got presenting mode on.
No comments or raised hands yet.
Okay. Well, I'll keep going. We can pick up things at the end if people are interested. So the other area is expanding the community, and I think one of the things, the motivations for the membership surveys was to understand DDI users better, the membership better. But I think actually understanding the users as well is really important to do that. And I think we want to do some outreach work to make sure that we know where it's being used broadly, what standards being used. But I think actually understanding what the potential challenges are for people, and how the standards we use can help solve those problems and increase adoption. One thing for asked in the membership survey, picked up in the membership, was about audience specific training materials, and I think the executive board want to support activities that do that. um, to increase depth of understanding in specific user audiences. And as we had a few partnerships existing, but I think we want to look at what other opportunities there are in terms of partnerships with other organisations at an executive level, but also at a practical level. I think where the action happens is in partnerships with organisations that are doing things at a practical level, and I think we'd like to see how ideas around that. So I'll be interested in particularly around understanding DDI users. If there's people who've got ideas around that will be really helpful. And obviously, if there's no questions today, people please contact the EB or put something in the user lists around these things so we can have a more meaningful discussion, take things forward. Oops. Someone put something in the chat, or is that me? Okay, and the other area is the aligning DDI development. So I think there is some work starting now around RDF across the different products, and that's a really healthy. Now we have potential serializations in three or four standards. That's a really interesting opportunity to show the commonality of the different products, and it's something that obviously, particularly in the IDF world, is much more important than it is in some other domains. Documentation always, we have one of our strap lines is document your data, and we should be doing that for ourselves as much as it is expecting other people to do that to improve our documentation. It's a hard thing to do, but I think some of this audience specific training focus materials I think might help to generate the sort of documentation that is much more pertinent to different audiences rather than sort of neutral technical documentation. And I think we also want to support tools development to help drive uptake. And we've seen the developers group, particularly over the last year or so, really come back to life, and that I think is a really healthy development. But also, involving, being aware of opportunities around international research projects and so on that can help contribute to the development of sustainable tools that support standards. So the EB have a broad strategy in terms of delivery of this plan, and that really is to have primarily to have a sort of rolling campaigns across different user groups. So in the absence of a marketing group, the secretariat and the executive board will lead this work, obviously consultation with working groups and so on, but we will make sure that there is a level of coordination in these activities. So we're proposing, partly because some people from NSOs have volunteered, and volunteers was worth three pressed men, as they say, to start with NSOs and related organisations. So the work around better understanding the needs of this group, some market research to identify potential new member organisations and users, to develop some supporting materials in conjunction with working groups aimed at this specific audience, and to hold some events and promotional activities where the products and resources can be showcased, to try to just focus down. I mean, we had the Cosmos conference a couple of months ago, which I think was a really good example of how the DDI community and the stats community have such very clear overlapping interests and desires. I think that's a very good place to start with this sort of targeted marketing activity. So that's me finished. Is there opening it up for discussion really, or any comments or thoughts or disagreements or emphasis would be really, really welcome. Wendy.
Yeah. I was just thinking in terms of means of supporting our current users, is when you have a large organization, DDI is it's maybe taken up by that broader group, but many of us are in small organizations and are pretty much represent DDI as one person in that organization. And it might be useful to have some tips or training sessions or something on various means of how to expand that involvement with across your organization, working with your IT group, working with the administrators, etc. Just an idea.
Cool. Dan?
Yeah, so of course I'm pretty interested in the efforts towards the NSOs. I have heard a little about this, but not very much, and I have quite a bit of experience, frustrating experience dealing with my own organization. And so, I'd like to be more deeply involved, but boy, I really don't know where to begin. We had a webinar last year directed towards the U.S. Federal Statistical agencies, and it was pretty well attended. But following up on that, I didn't get any questions or traffic from it, so I I'm sort of at a loss as to how to proceed in a lot of these areas. So I'd be interested in trying to come up with different modes of attack.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think we want that we're quite keen that we do some research on this to actually scope out the problem a bit more clearly and have so clear messaging and so on, because it is tough on one-to-one within an organization to do some of those things. But I think there are lots of straws in the wind, I think, and that certainly Eddie's been approached by UNECE to have some activities. I think there is a lot of things going on. I think we need to pull it together, and I think that's why I'm sort of talking around as earlier, talking about sort of practical things that we could do with organisations. It's fine having committee meetings, but actually having joint events and doing materials that target the estimates community, and also the estimates community, for instance, explaining to some people in the DDI community some of the benefits of their standards, which I mean, I'm not an expert, but on estimates at all, it's something I barely have a very simple grasp of. I think actually that interchange between the communities would be beneficial, and I think help to build that level of understanding of why DDI is important, particularly
Working that,
and there's lots of things where DDI could be really, really important to NSOs in a way perhaps it wasn't in the same way. With surveys are much all this sort of stuff. The world is so I think there's a place for DDI in this moving world as well. So
well, we should coordinate with work that the UNECE is doing, because they are trying to find a way to tie together DDI, STMX, and the UNECE standards, GSIM in particular, in a meaningful way. And the STMX community is a hard one to crack because they think that their standard solves every problem known to statistical agencies. So we have an uphill battle.
When in terms of, I mean, one thing I've been really, really impressed with recently is the way in which people have been involved in the training group. So, you know, I think there's been a lot of people involved in the training group who have been basically get other people in their own organizations to help, you know, sometimes in very small ways initially, but then they become much more active in the training group. And I think that's a really interesting way of actually, you know, involving people in your own organization. You know, Understand Society group has got three people involved in the training group, and a year ago they didn't have anyone, or barely one person was. So, you know, it's a lot of that sort of bottom up, you know, people recommending actually turning up to the training group is really interesting, you know, rather than just being a bureaucratic meeting. I think that's something. Hilda.
Yes, I think we in the scientific board, there is nothing in the bylaws really for us to hold events other than community meetings. And what I would suggest is that you and the EB really create the marketing group when you would do these activities anyway, because from an organizational perspective, that is more kind of clear who has the responsibility. Like, for example, now on the scientific board, as I will show in my presentation, we have already appointed a contact for the scientific board for the UNECE community, which is our fund, and that is an informal contact. And Flavio also from his work has kind of official role in these audiences. And therefore, I think if there was a marketing group, they could collaborate with our contact persons and so on. Be a more clean approach, I think. That's at least a suggestion. Anyway, there needs to be a collaboration between our contacts and the persons who are working on this. But if you could do, for example, one of you could, for example, be the chair of that marketing group, and like elsewhere in the DDI Alliance, lots of things are happening, and we are so happy for everything. But nobody is really punished if we don't manage, because we are a voluntary organization. So that's just a suggestion from me here, and you can think it over what you think.
Yeah, it's coordination. I mean, I think one of the problems is, you know, that we have put a call out for marketing group several times, 3 times, and had nothing back. And so, you know, I think that the idea would be that, you know, actually having these events will actually attract people to be participating and actually see marketing as being a useful thing they might react to add to the alliance, or they might be interested in. So hopefully that will generate the enthusiasm to have a functioning marketing group. But we can't, but you know, we need to, you know, I think that the EB's made the decision that in the absence of that, we have to have some coordinating role. Someone's got to try to do that. And I think that's what we're going to have to do in the absence of any other possibility at the moment. And I agree, Chandra, I agree, you know, the vote on NSOs, you know, there's a lot of smaller NSOs in LMICs that definitely would benefit from having better understanding with DDI, and I think that will be yeah, really good suggestion. And the World Bank, obviously, who have the previous year members as well, definitely.
Amber has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. No, I was just gonna, so I think there's definitely NSOs. So in Canada, Statistics Canada has been engaging in a long-term sort of project to revamp all of their data production workflows and to produce DDI from that sort of collection and production phase all the way through, but that hasn't been realized. And so I just want to let everyone know that we're still not receiving open DDI metadata from StatCan. There's a huge amount of resources going into this, and it's bottlenecked, and there's sort of various points of breakdown in terms of public access to that metadata, which affects downstream like archiving efforts, discovery efforts, and so a variety of efforts. So if there's at all in that training advocacy work that can be promoted in terms of best practices, what you're seeing from some of the statistical agencies that maybe are achieving this goal, I would please talk to StatCan. In addition to NSOs, there's just like a variety of needs from the research data community that I think this community could, I know that there have been like webinar series and efforts done in various areas across many of your organizations. But there are so many opportunities still within the sort of like research software integration realm. I'm hearing a lot about like RedCap and Dataverse, and DDI are really like built into those tools. And so for someone thinking about, okay, well, what standards can we use to get started? DDI comes up first in all of those conversations. And it would be nice if there were, I guess, like example integrations, mappings, crosswalks made available for a variety of different tools out there, and that we maintain these mappings in an authoritative way. In some, I don't know how we do that, but one example is, so Dataverse is developing a new exporter framework that would have different installations kind of maintain those exporting mappings and frameworks themselves outside of the core code. So this is a huge opportunity for us to review the DDI mappings from the Dataverse schema, and potentially produce other kinds of DDI. Obviously, when there are no linkages, it will be limited, but I think that this opens up some potential opportunities for building community around maintaining those mappings from repository software like Dataverse, but I'd also like to see others like share those mappings and crosswalks to other kinds of systems and standards more broadly, because that's increasingly the kind of projects that I'm seeing evolve here and that we're being brought into. So those are just some additional thoughts.
I think certainly they'd be useful if you can forward that information to the technical committee so that they're aware of what's happening. I think if there are member organisations who are, I think one of the things is there are plenty of member organisations who are using similar software and are involved in these activities. And I think it's, I think the Alliance could help to coordinate across different organisations, different members to, to make sure that we've got help make sure some of those sort of things are sustainable. Maintaining long-term compatible software is a very, very hard job, as everyone knows. But I think in terms of the coordination of the people actually using those tools, I think the Alliance could play a role in doing that, and I'm sure the developers group has got views as well about some of those things as well. So if you could share, that'd be really, really interesting. Okay. Is there anyone else got anything? If not, I will move on to scientific board reports. That's okay. Right, I'm gonna have to stop sharing and reshare. I'm afraid I can't do this on. Can people see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Uh,
Okay.
Can you put it in the presentation mode, please?
I can try it. 5 seconds. Where is that?
It's
Google.
a slideshow button.
Slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, you just give me a shout if you want me to move the slides on.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Hilde Orten. I'm chair of the DDI Alliance Scientific Board, and will give a brief overview of our activities in the past year. Next slide, please, John. Yeah, so here you can see the current members of the scientific board and our roles. And yeah, I'm the chair, Darren, vice chair. We have Flavio, Ingo, Simon, Wolfgang as members, and Jared and Wendy as ex officio members due to their roles as director and technical committee chair. And past members are Carsten Thiel and Achim Wakova. Yeah, Dan Smith, of course. You're right, Wendy. I saw in the chat, I forgot Dan Smith. And he is our newest member on the scientific board. So we are having virtual meetings every month. And also quarterly, we have executive board and scientific board coordination calls led by Jared. We had a physical scientific board meeting in Bergen to the 9th and 10th of October 2023. And we also organized an event at Eddie together with Jared and John about envisioning the future of DDI in the metadata landscape. Next slide, please. John? Yeah. So in our last scientific plan, really, we were focused on internal proceedings to really establish ourselves as a board and to get an overview of the work going on in the working groups. So since last year, we have 2 new working groups, and that is the RDF equivalence working group that John was mentioning earlier. And we also have a new questions and questionnaires working group who will focus on those topics and provide best practices and so on. And we had a group that is no longer in existence, that is the Power Data Working Group. And on the right-hand side, you can see all our other committees and working groups. Of course, we have the TC, who is doing a great job with everything to keep track of all the publications and kind of technical infrastructure stuff, and also now migration of products and websites, and organizing kind of tooling now to move from handcrafted to automated output of the various representations and so on. They are doing a super job. And the CCV group has also been working on control vocabularies and on related tooling. The CDI working group has now delivered the release candidate 2 version to the TC, and that is the kind of expected to be the final before that goes out for vote and publication. And we have the developers group who had a hackathon in May, and they are working now on a tool that Olof Olsson kind of started that is called Nectar, and that is doing it's thought of as a little replacement for Nasta. And then we have the glossary group working group, and that has been providing its first version of the glossary, and this is now in review. The SCTL working group has also a new product coming up now, which is called SDTH. that is taking care of transformation, but also taking history and provenance into account. And the X-course, it is kind of fine, but it is now expecting some input from Eurostat on the things. And then, of course, we have the training working group, and they have been doing a super job, really. They have been doing slide decks that have been published, and several thousands have been viewing and downloading them. And they have been giving webinars in collaboration with CoData, and that also has really been supported by the audience, and also more trainings on request and things. All the things the working groups have been doing are now listed in a little highlights document, and that is included in the agenda. You can see that there. I posted now in the chat the link to the agenda, and you can also see the materials from the scientific community meeting that we had, where all the presentations from the working groups are, and also the recording from that. So thank you very much to everybody in the working groups. It's so much going on, and we are very proud of everything that is happening, and try to support that. John, next slide, please. Yeah, and then we have been working on a new scientific work plan, and now, differently from last time, it is structured in terms of 3 strategic priorities of the strategic plan that John just informed about. It is goal-oriented. It is kind of medium in detail, to leave a little bit of space for the working groups to orient their work. And it contains both continuous and time-specific tasks, and it will be implemented by us on the scientific board, the TC, and the working groups, also in collaboration. Next slide, please. And now we are back to our formal work plan. When we looked at that again, we found that some of the tasks we really put up here are continuous, so they are really ongoing all the time. Some are more like TC tasks, like the first one here, and some of these have been transferred to our new plan that Darren will go through after, and some are in green that we have been doing, and that is, for example, the second one. We have now contact persons from the SB for all of the working groups. And last year also the developers group was up and running, so that is really not for this year. And will you go to the next slide, because I will only focus on the green, and you can look at the others afterwards. And then again, as John said, it's very important to establish organization level relationship with standards body and also other important organizations. And we have an W3C liaison that is active. Darren is the W3C liaison, and we are also working from the CDI group regarding possibilities for that. And for the UNEC Stats community, we have Arafan appointed as an informal liaison for the scientific board, and he will work together with Flavio on these things. And maybe other interested people can contact them. And also we have something new, SB10 here, which is quite interesting, because for some time there has been a kind of wish from the ISO and also the DDI Alliance side that we explore the possibilities and benefits for doing for including some DDI product as an ISO standard. And Now we will establish this as a kind of temporary working group under the scientific board. So it's a little unlike the other working groups. And the mandate for the group will soon be ready, and it is really to explore possibilities and benefits. And that will be group will be chaired by Dan Gilman. He has already agreed to that, and it has been approved. But in order to make this functional, we need to have the mandate ready, and we have that on the agenda for our next scientific board meeting on June 18th. Next slide, please. Yeah, and other upcoming activities. We will have a physical meeting in Ko, if it is funded, in December 2024 in connection with EDDI. And the main tasks will be to follow up on the task from the scientific work plan and to engage with the working groups on reporting and other issues that may come up. And also for our meetings in future, we plan to focus on, for each meeting, on one of the strategic priorities. So that is a kind of new thing for us. So I think that was what, do I have more slides, John?
Nope, I think so.
Yeah, so any questions or comments other than those who are in the chat? Otherwise, I hand over to Darren, but please comment if there are. And again, thank you so much. We are really impressed, and both of the amount of things have been done and the quality of the work and the engagement and everything from you in the working groups. It's impressive, and the TC also.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hilda. So I'll continue on with that, with an overview of the scientific work plan that we've come up with for 24 to 26. Now, just a little bit of background on this. A lot of the content here has emerged from the scientific board meeting we had in Bergen back in October, and ongoing conversations between the EB and the SB and technical committee. Now, where we are with DDI, as John alluded to earlier in the kind of opening set of slides, was that DDI now is kind of 20 or so years into its existence, and what started as a really good, XML schema, set of XML schemas, is now becoming a much more comprehensive and potentially complex ecosystem of different products. So what we're trying to do in terms of the narrative is work towards better definition of entry points for different audiences into that ecosystem, making it clearer perhaps which products are appropriate for which use cases, and really looking, as one of those pillars suggests, to expand the coverage of DDI in different use cases, and indeed in different domains going forward, while making sure that we continue to serve the traditional, in inverted commas, social sciences audience, which is our bread and butter. So we're very grateful from the SB, Hilda and I, to the EB for working on the strategic plan, which gives us a nice platform on which to base some aligned goals. As Hilda said, what we've tried to do is strike the right balance between the abstraction, if you like, that comes out of a strategy at the high level from the EB, but not to be so granular as to end up being too prescriptive to the working groups as what they should do. So the SB work plan sits somewhere between the level of abstraction from a strategy and specific granular deliverables, from the individual working groups. So because it's always good to align things and to be consistent, this time we formulated the scientific work plan along those three pillars. So there are a number of goals related to engagement, and expansion and alignment in that order. So, I'm not going to read these bullet points out, but, generally this is a synopsis of what our thinking is here in terms of the virtuous hierarchy of the governance of the Alliance. The Executive Board is there to set the tone and the priorities. They also have a special responsibility for finance and the budget. The Scientific Board takes that strategy, defines some overall goals that align with it, but as I said, not in such a way that we're effectively issuing work orders. What it is to set some goals and support those working groups in their delivery of those goals. Technical committee is a special case, and sorry, I use the word special advisedly, but what technical committee does is actually oversee standards and technical best practices, and it does have a special role in being the glue that makes all the working groups work in a consistent way. And the working groups themselves, of which we have a pretty fair number now, are responsible for implementing those goals in a way that they see fit. As I said, the role of the Scientific Board is not to be super prescriptive to individual working groups and say you must do it in this way. And over time, the Scientific Board meets once a month, and we will, going forward now, review these goals and essentially how are we doing? Do some of the working groups need additional support? Are things going off track? Where do we need to provide support and help for the different working groups? So I say I'm not going to read through these verbatim, but I'll just give you a brief overview of some of the thinking behind these. We've got 4 goals that are aligned with the first pillar, if you like, in the strategy, which is around engagement. Developing recommendations for better signposting and product marketing is really engaging with that wider audience to say, okay, if you've got this use case, you need to be using SDTL, but make that as clear and transparent as possible. Now, there are different ways to do this, whether that's through the website, which is undergoing a kind of review over the next year to 18 months, or whether through its additional training channels or communication channels. Those are open to interpretation, but the idea is that we do make it easier for our end users to get into DDI. And from personal experience, I started using DDI 12 years ago, and I'll be honest, on occasions I found it a little bit challenging to find exactly where I needed to start, where I needed to go next. So I think there's always areas for improvement there. In terms of understanding our audience, there are some things here about developing, as my colleague Hervé would call it, big lists of stakeholders. When we talk about our audiences, having a specific list of audiences, their composition, contacts list, external representation lists, those are all useful kind of business information artifacts to have, so we can build those out, and possibly those would be developed as part of the new website and a kind of contact management system there. Hilda and John have alluded to W3C, so deepening our connections with some of those external standards body, but striking the right balance between giving our IP away at one level, but making sure that we can engage better with those. And it's been said a million times before, it's one thing to develop a standard. The standard really gets traction when you start to have an ecosystem of tools that are surrounding it. So the DDI Developers Group has been doing some fantastic work, and it's got some really motivated and capable individuals. So the SB does have a direct role in, kind of steering and targeting where that tools development should go, and making sure that people are aware of it. And the more developers we can bring on side and on board to work on DDI tooling, the better. So those are the 4 kind of main goals that we've got around engagement. Now, with expansion, we have a few more here. You will notice that the timescales are intentionally not too specific. I think we all know that this is a voluntary organisation, and we are eternally grateful that people are willing to devote their time. And as John said, the amount that the DDI Alliance achieves on a yearly basis is pretty fantastic, considering that no one gets paid to do this stuff. But it's no good, putting June 25 for some of those things. I think just broad windows of time is what we're aiming to define for any of these goals. So in terms of expansion, there's a few things we'd like to do around persistent identifiers, making the registry more widely understood, increasing the awareness of that. The DDI registry has been sitting there quietly in the background for a number of years now, and it's almost certainly not getting enough traction and publicity. So that's something we want to actively promote over the next year or two. Examples, tools is an important dimension, but how to use DI, read real world examples of markup, whether that's going to be XCOS examples or life cycle examples or SDT examples. You can never have enough examples for users to feel that they've got an easy entry point into DDI. So we will be actively encouraging that. Looking at the cross-domain side of things, in a sense, FAIR in and of itself isn't necessarily cross-domain, but just how do we engage better with those large European initiatives, or outside of Europe, something like CDIF. So it's how do we kind of push DDI wider out into those global communities. We've already alluded to SDMX and UNECE community collaborations. So that's going to be something that's going to be happening over the next couple of years. When we had some conversations about global coverage of DDI, we do know that, the DDI codebook especially has a good presence in Africa. Are we engaging enough with some of the geographical communities outside of North America, Europe and Australia? Possibly not. So we thought it was appropriate to put that in as an explicit goal in here, to find mechanisms whereby we could engage with those communities in Africa and South America and potentially Asia. So we felt that was really important to include that here. ISO certification is another example where we're kind of widening the visibility of DDI. Now, Dan Gilman is going to be setting up a working group very soon, which will initially be investigative. What's the cost benefit analysis? ISO standard. Pulling that off is not a trivial exercise at all. What's in it for DDI? So we will be exploring, the potential of certifying some aspect or aspects of DDI over the next year anyway, and Dan Gilman will be leading on that work. Again, similar to tools and markup examples, further implementation guides, but tailored more towards specific audiences. We have plenty of those already, but on the basis that you can never really have enough. I think, blueprints, architecture guidance, how and to whom can we address those kinds of implementation guides. And in terms of funding, what funding opportunities are out there? Horizon Europe, as many of you will know, is a multi-million euro funding juggernaut. Are there opportunities for the DDI Alliance to leverage some of those calls? So yeah, just a slightly more proactive investigation of funding opportunities. Okay, and finally moving on to alignment, and some of these have already been train for a while now through the technical committee, but it's definitely worthwhile including those explicitly in the scientific work plan, aligning and standardizing technical documentation. We want to make sure that as we're building out this integrated product suite, that we have some level of consistency of messaging, branding, templates, formats, methodologies. So that's 3.1 is included on that basis, and the TC has been doing a lot of good work over the last year, 1 to 2 years on that already. Now, when we talk about big lists and stabilizing some of the ways that we manage technical information and business information and marketing information, for instance, as you will know, we have a Confluence site. We have various buckets on, whether that be kind of GitHub or, different information artifacts. I think having a formal information architecture, and, we're sailing fairly close to the wind in terms of business bullshit, but by information architecture, what I mean is, how do we structure in a very clean and transparent way where all our information is stored in the interests of finding and locating it easily? So this will, overlaps with the redesign of the website over the next 1 to 2 years. The idea is ultimately very simple. It's not complicated. How can we ensure that users can find what they need as quickly as possible? So on kind of the same theme, an integrated training platform and media library isn't a revolutionary proposition. It's simply just how do we start to align and make more consistent those different resources. You'll know from the DDI Alliance website that we have a section for tools, markup examples. In terms of UX and navigation, it's not always that easy to find exactly what you need quickly. How to ensure that stale content is deprecated or retired, all of those kinds of things. So 3.4 is again stabilizing and articulating more cleanly and in a more structured way what different communications channels we have. We have a YouTube presence. Are we maximizing the potential of that YouTube presence and integrating the different social media channels as clean as possible? So we'll be doing some work on that and promoting activities around that. And similarly on 3.5, in terms of internal communication, how do we improve and the liaison between the scientific board and the working groups? I think a couple of people have been slightly alarmed by more formal periodic reporting. We're certainly not embarking on a whole reporting apparatus. We're just looking for, cleaner, more transparent ways to ensure that the SB can support the working groups in the best way possible, and where there are issues, how do we get to know about them? How do we get to mitigate them as quickly as possible? So the scientific board currently has a named contact for each working group. I personally am not 100% sure whether that's working as effectively as it could. Is there a different way we could do that? What do the working groups need in terms of support from the SB? So that there's an area of work there that we will look at this year in terms of improving that. The relationship with the technical committee is very, very important for the SB, because the technical committee does have a unique role in aligning and managing the infrastructure. Now, there's a huge amount of great work being done already in terms of migrating from Bitbucket onto GitHub, but in terms of really getting those hot CI/CD pipelines that are easy to work with, easy to understand, automatic generation of documentation, the SB will work with the TC to make sure that we can get that developed as optimally as possible over the next couple of years. Now, the 3.7, there's nothing new under the sun about this, but RDF is very much a thing that the SB is committed to. There are many reasons why we want to support RDF, not least because of interoperability and the emergence of JSON and JSON LD over the last few years as a as a kind of very major format, whereas 20 years ago XML was clearly the kind of realistically the only game in town in terms of interchange. JSON is now, for a lot of developers, the preferred format. You know, we're not at a standing start with this by any means. DDI 4.0 and 3.3 to some extent, and DDI, CDI all have got, you know, formal RDF serializations. How do we, you know, apply some consistent linked data principles across all of the products? Codebook is a special and interesting case when it comes to RDF, but the aspiration is that we would like Codebook to have an RDF representation eventually. So the SB's role is to kind of support and nurture those initiatives to work towards RDF across the whole of the product suite. And then 3.8 is really a statement of intent. You know, rather than getting to the specifics of individual product numbers, we're saying, you know, that we do want to support, you know, the release of new products over the course of the work plan. I mean, on the near to medium horizon, we're going to have DDI 2.6 and potentially 2.7 in the next 2 years, although that's a slightly open question. DDI 4.0 is in beta at the moment. CDI, we hope that's on release candidate 2. SDTL, there will be some more development on that. So yes, it's the SB's role to oversee that product roadmap, if you like. Well, sorry, the TC design is responsible for the product roadmap, but the SB needs to have that supporting role. Okay, so what we've tried to do overall is keep this as lightweight and simple as possible in the interest of not boring people with too much verbiage. But the idea is that, you know, this, you know, just to recap it at the risk of labouring the point, to align with the strategy and effectively have a clear translation between the strategy and the working group granular activities. Okay, so that's my little monologue over. I don't know if anyone has any questions about all of that, or comments or observations, or
I have a comment in the sense that, you know, I think one of the rebooting of the scientific board a few years ago, I think is really starting to show now. I think it's you know, it's a really important coordinating activities across the alliance. I think it's been, you know, credit to the people who've been involved that they've managed to achieve so much in quite a short period.
Okay. Well, as ever, my email is open, so if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop me an email.
So, and the SB meets every month, so you should get a quick response. Cool. Okay. If there's no other comments or thoughts, I will move over to the financial report. Do you want me to share that for you, Jared, or are you okay doing that?
I think I'm good. Can you see it?
Yeah.
All right. So this is the financial report for this last fiscal year. The fiscal year runs from July through June. Just a reminder of what was approved for this current fiscal year, a number of things. So the DDI Technical Committee had funding for meetings and infrastructure support, meetings and work from DDI CDI, training for workshops and webinars, Dogstall organizers for a couple Dogstall meetings, a couple weeks of meetings in October and September. And then for the DDI Developers Working Group, a hackathon that just took place, a scientific board meeting, and then funds set aside for website migration. And so this is the actuals or the forecast for this current fiscal year. You can see we had 94th $48,500 US for budgeted for revenue. We came in under that. The forecast shows that we'll looks like we'll bring in about $86,500 US. But for expenses, the expenses came significantly under what was budgeted. You can see the total expenses basically broke even with revenue if you don't account for that one expense that was held over from last year. And so the ending fund balance, this is our reserves, is still very healthy. It's projected at $348,000 US. As past years, we put out a request for funding proposals for this upcoming fiscal year. So for the fiscal year 25, those were submitted last month, and they are currently in review. The scientific board has looked at the requests related to scientific and technical activities and just put their recommendations into the executive board, which will meet later this month, and will then give notification to those who put in requests for funding. So that's it for the budget report. Any questions? All right, well then I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, I haven't been notified of any other business, but has anyone got anything they want to pick up on what hasn't been covered, or they want to raise an issue that that didn't get a chance to respond to earlier, perhaps? Okay, tough audience today. Okay, fine. Well, it's been nice to see so many people on the call. And yeah, as Jared said, the working groups, people put funding requests in, will be notified in shorter time as we can manage bureaucratically. And I think there's a lot of activities outlined by the scientific board and the executive board over the next year, as well as the multitude of activities by the working groups themselves. So I do hope that people are able to participate in those. I'm going to abuse my position slightly by saying that the call for proposals for EDI is open. You have until September. One of the focuses of the conference this year will be community and community building. So particularly interested in proposals that are around those issues. You know, and we would welcome those. If those people are able to come, see you face to face in Kur in December. That's me abusing my position. But yeah, so I'd like to thank everybody for coming and participating. And well, we don't see you before. We'll see you at the next annual meeting in probably online in 2025. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.